I wanted to start just by saying what an honor it is to be here this morning to worship with you all. I really appreciate it very much. In the weeks leading up to Easter Sunday, the scripture readings in the lectionary tell us all a very familiar story. Much like the readings that we had in the lead up to Christmas, the Easter scriptures find us all on very familiar biblical ground. We all know the basic tales of Palm Sunday and of the Last Supper and of the final days of Christ and of his final moments on the cross. And we can all recite the triumphant story of the rolled away stone and the empty tomb. After Easter, especially in the United Church of Christ, we always retell the also very familiar story of doubting Thomas, who needed to see the Lord and to be able to put his hands into the wounds of the risen Christ, to believe that in fact it was Jesus who rose from the dead. The story of Thomas is one of the most familiar biblical stories we have of the risen Christ. In that story, we find Jesus reassuring Thomas that the story of his resurrection is in fact true. The other oft-cited story of the risen Christ is one that I often reference on mission trips or in service work. It is the tale that we find in John chapter 21, when Jesus returns to Simon Peter and asks 3 times, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" To which Peter responds with a resounding yes. "Then feed my sheep," Jesus says to him, "tend my lambs." It is this story of the risen Christ that tasks all of us with caring for all of God's people. Keeping teenagers and young people passionate about serving the poor is something that I've worked hard to do all over the Connecticut River Valley for years. The importance of serving the poor is evident, it is clear, and it is unapologetic in the Gospels. It is undeniably an important message for all of our children to receive. It is a message that ties them all to the rest of humanity, but also, I believe, to their God in a very real way. But service is not something that is only accomplished by the youth. There are many adults involved in serving the poor, both in this congregation and in surrounding UCC churches. And keeping adults engaged and inspired can often be a little bit trickier than keeping teenagers involved and inspired. Traveling into the poorest parts of this world and serving the poorest of the poor is not always easy, and truthfully, it doesn't always feel good. Those members of your congregation who have volunteered with the nonprofit Simply Smiles can certainly attest to this during coffee hour. Working alongside the lonely and the sick and the forgotten children of God is very tough work for the soul. It requires an incredibly firm foundation of faith, as well as a constant and close relationship with Christ. But I do think that ultimately service work brings us a deeper understanding of ourselves and a deeper understanding of our God. And so this morning I wanted to explore some of the things that Christ said about the work of this world, and specifically where that work begins for each of us. Going back through the Gospels, we can revisit the things that Christ said to his disciples in the earlier days of his teachings. In the Gospel reading from this morning, we find the following words. "Do you now believe?" Jesus replied, "A time is coming, and in fact has come, when you all will be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone, yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, because I have overcome the world." These are perhaps some of the most valuable pieces of information that Christ gives to us, and certainly information that is highly applicable to all of our lives today. He makes two things clear at the start of this passage. One, that the time has come for each of us to be scattered to our own homes. And two, that in this world we will have trouble. Please note that Christ does not mince words here. He does not say that we might have trouble. He says that we will have trouble while we are scattered in our own homes, but that we can take heart knowing that he has overcome the troubles of this world so that in him we may find peace. One of the things that I find especially interesting here is Christ's reference to us being scattered each to our own homes. He doesn't say that we'll be scattered to our own countries, our own cities, or even our own houses, but he uses the word home. Depending, though, on who you are and where you are on life's journey, your definition of home could be changing. In fact, home, the word itself, has one of the most fluid definitions of any word in the entire English language. Webster's dictionary defines the word home in several ways. Home is one's place of residence, a social unit formed by a family, or a familial and congenial environment. Home can also be defined as a place of origin, one's country or one's goal. Webster's tells us that people are at home when they are in harmony with their environment, at ease, or on familiar ground. Those of us who are parents know that one of the most exciting and yet terrifying days of our entire life as a new parent is the day that we bring a baby home from the hospital. I can distinctly remember that moment at Yale New Haven Hospital when the nurses told my husband and I that we could put our son in the car seat and take him home. I can remember being petrified and thinking to myself, I can't believe the nurses are going to let me take this thing home. It is a daunting task to bring a baby home for the first time, to make a home for something that is so dependent and so fragile. But those of us who have recently lost a loved one also might think of home in an entirely different way. Oftentimes when someone we love reaches the end of his or her life, we say that they have gone home to be with God, or that she is at rest in the home of the Lord. In these two bookends of the life cycle, going home means extraordinarily different things. And in between birth and death, our definition of home changes constantly. So I want you to take a moment and think in your own mind of what your definition of home might be right now. For instance, does your home have four walls? Or rather than being a building, is your definition of home instead a group of people that you care about? Is home a geographic location for you, or is home a feeling? There is no right or wrong answer here. I'm simply asking you to take a moment to think about what your definition of home might be. In the famous poem, Death of a Salesman, Robert Frost famously wrote that home is the place where you determine you have to go there, they have to let you in. The reading from Corinthians this morning introduces an entirely new definition of home when it says, therefore we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we live by faith, not by sight. We are confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord, and so we make it our goal to please him, whether we are at home in the body or away from it. Home can be a body or a country. Home can be a village or a planet. Home can be a building, a feeling, or another human being. But one thing is certain, home is always changing. And once we realize that fact, it again alters the way in which we hear today's scripture reading. Here are the words from Christ again. A time is coming when you will be scattered, each to your own home. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. 13 years ago now, I spent some time living and working at the Central Methodist Mission in downtown Johannesburg, South Africa. Since I left Central, the building itself has been used as a temporary home for more than 10,000 African refugees fleeing their homelands for various reasons. But when I stayed at Central, they had only a few hundred refugees coming in and out of the building on any given day. The program that I ran was called Umkhumbi Sizwe, or the Ark of the Nation, as translated. It was an attempt by the church downtown to engage homeless but skilled refugees in the home-based care of people living with HIV and AIDS in downtown Joburg. I'm happy to report that Umkhumbi Sizwe is alive to this day at Central, and these days they work alongside Doctors Without Borders to provide top-notch care for the poorest of the poor in Johannesburg. But when I worked at Umkhumbi, there were only 5 people on staff. And it was here that I met a young man by the name of Sam Mugambi. Sam was a Kenyan refugee. He was a very slight man, standing at about 5 foot 5 inches tall and weighing in at roughly 120 pounds. Knowing this, it may come as a surprise to some of you, that I was actually quite scared of Sam when I met him. Sam was the closest thing that I had to a co-pilot in the early days of Umkhumbi, but his persona could not have been any more unlike mine if we had specifically tried to create an oddball match. Fresh out of college, I was a wide-eyed, optimistic, pale-skinned female with a penchant for speaking with my hands. And Sam was a very dark-skinned North African whose demeanor was unfailingly serious and subdued. It took me weeks to get Sam to smile enough for me to know that he actually had teeth. And because of this, my ability to read what he was thinking at any given moment was severely handicapped. And I'm ashamed to say that in the beginning, I read Sam as being both heartless and disengaged. But I'm happy to report that my first instinct was proven totally wrong. In fact, there are few people in my life who have proven me to be more wrong than Sam Mugambi. And I will tell you why. Sam was 16 years old, 16, when he fled his homeland. He grew up in a quiet village in the beautiful jungles of Kenya. But once he entered adolescence, the political climate in his country took a turn for the worse, as opposing militias jockeyed for power in guerrilla-style warfare. Before he fled, Sam was awoken in the middle of the night by a man with a gun who forced him to watch as his parents were murdered and his childhood home was burned to the ground. That night, Sam was given 2 choices: to fight alongside the guerrillas or to die. And after some thought, Sam chose to forge his own path, and so he fled, leaving behind everything he had ever known. By the time I met Sam, he was in his early 30s, which meant that he had lived his sort of more than half of his life at that point outside of his country. And in fact, I remember thinking that it was a rather curious thing that Sam continued to refer to Kenya as his home when he hadn't actually lived there in so long. Nonetheless, once Sam and I had established a solid working relationship, we got to know each other as friends, leaning on one another for support when needed and comforting one another on particularly tough days. The work that we did in Johannesburg was some of the toughest work that I have ever had to do. We worked with folks who were sicker and poorer than words can describe. We helped people every day who were barely clinging to life by the skin of their teeth. And so it was on one of those very tough work days that my story really begins. Sam and I had spent the day out in Johannesburg working with homeless refugees, attempting to connect to people in need with the services that they were looking for. And at the tail end of a grueling afternoon in an abandoned building, I had met a female refugee who was homeless, shoeless, sick, and pregnant. Her story was not an easy one to hear. And being at the end of the long day, it brought out the most pessimistic side of me. When we finished up and headed home, I told Sam that I just wanted to be alone for a little while. And as I sat quietly in my office, I silently started to admit to myself that I might really not be cut out for this kind of disheartening work. I wasn't sure that I had it in me to keep working with that level of poverty. And truth be told, I found myself at a very difficult impasse with my own faith that day. I wasn't sure that I could believe in a God, or for that matter, love a God, that could allow this level of pain and suffering to exist. Looking up then, I saw the small, dark, subdued silhouette of Sam Mugambi walking through my door. So I started to get up and I said, Sam, I don't want to talk right now. And I admitted that I was embarrassed to be so rattled in front of him, to be so totally undone and emotionally drained by one woman's story. But Sam didn't say a word. He sat down across from me, across from my desk, and he let me talk. And then he slowly slid an open Bible across the table. Well-worn, marked up, and heavily dog-eared, Sam's Bible was open to today's scripture reading. And underlined were the following words. A time is coming when you will be scattered, each to your own home. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. When I finished reading that passage, I said, Sam, I worry that I made a mistake coming here. I watch you interact with people on the streets, and I know that you have faced so much pain in your life, survived such immense loss, and yet you have this unending well of compassion within yourself. But Sam shook his head and he sucked in a deep breath, and he tapped his finger on the page of the open Bible, and he said, Emily, there's really only two things that I know for sure. In my home, there will always be trouble, and with my God, there will always be peace. Those two things, Sam explained to me, are universally true. It doesn't matter where your home is. You can be from Kenya or South Africa or America. It doesn't matter if your home is a cardboard box or a mansion. It actually doesn't matter if your version of home is a young, healthy body or an aging one. It doesn't matter if home for you conjures up an image of a full Thanksgiving table or a dirt floor surrounded by corrugated tin. No matter what your home looks like, Sam said, it will not insulate you from trouble. Only God can do that. And please don't misunderstand me, Emily. The trouble of this world is real, but so is our God. Jesus said that in this world you will have trouble, and in me you will find peace. In this post-resurrection world that we all live in, this is the message that we must carry forth. It is, in fact, the only message that we need to sustain ourselves. Christ said, he told us, in this world you will have trouble. We all will. No one gets exempted from that one. We will all be scattered, each to our own homes. We will all have troubles of one kind or another that we have to face. And believe me when I tell you that the trouble of this world is real, but so is our God. And I know concretely that if that message could sustain a guy like Sam Mugambi throughout the life that he has lived, it can certainly sustain me through whatever trouble this world throws my way. And so this morning I would like to invite all of us to say that to ourselves several times a day. I think it's one of the most important messages in the entire Bible. One that, as I said earlier, is highly applicable to our lives 2,000 years after that first Easter morning. In fact, if I could just choose only one piece of wisdom to impart on my own children, that would be it. In this world, there will be trouble. And with my God, there will be peace. Because with God's peace as our anchor, I guarantee that we can weather any storm. With that knowledge, I know we can face any pain. With that wisdom, we can move through the heartache of this world with confidence, even when we are scattered all over this beautiful planet, in our own homes and facing our own troubles. The peace of our God is always with us. And so this morning, that is also my prayer for this place. I hope that the Essex Church is a weekly slice of that for each of us. My prayer for us all is that this space, this sanctuary, this beautiful church, is a weekly window into God's peace for all of us. So that no matter how scattered we all are, no matter how large the troubles loom in our own homes, that this becomes a place of peace where we all agree to sit down together and take a breath and remember that though the troubles of this world are real, so is our God. Amen.
Amen.
Now, before we start with our what I call the prayer of God's people, I hope this is okay with you all, but I usually like to ask the congregation if there's anything specific that you all would like to pray for this morning. I see there are some specific people listed in the bulletin, but if any of you have any particular person on your mind for any reason, just put your hand up and let me know so that I can put them in the prayer. Go ahead.